the time to listen to me grind. Take down the film.
Sorry, the dystopian nature of some people's ability to believe something despite very easy access to like information that they could use to find out if what they think is true. Just complete disregard for it. Like sometimes it just kind of blows my mind. There's an interesting trend where players at lower level conferences, and I'm still having a pretty hard time defining lower level conference, because when that kind of thing comes up as a non-college watcher, like I'm not memeing there about I don't watch tape, or I don't even watch football. Not that kind of I don't watch college. Like I'm not a college football guy. Like I'm not aware of the conferences. I don't know who's good. I don't know what the score was. I don't really even know what the bowl games are for or who wins them. Okay. Like my spare time is full trying to dig into the NFL stuff. Like, so I've been asked to try out other sports, and I'm like, I don't think you realize, like, this is already a full-time job in my spare bunny rabbit ears time. Like, I'm just trying to keep up with the nines, man. I'm running on a treadmill, and and every now and again, people are like, why don't you also do that marathon? I'm already out of breath. So, like, I don't know college. It's that simple. That's all I mean about it. Not a joke, not a meme, just no idea. So it's really hard for me to know. And when people say that stuff, what I found it to mean when it bears out in practice, not everyone, but is I don't like that player, so I want to come up with a reason that he's not good. But like I don't get it. Like I don't not want to like any player or any player's potential to be good in the NFL. I don't get wanting that. Like I don't. Maybe it's because I don't have a favorite team. Bunny Rabbit is again. I don't have a favorite conference, or I don't want one team to win the Super Bowl over the other. And I know that probably made a few of you click off, but like, I play fantasy football. I really enjoy it. I love hanging out with my friends and talking about football. I like players. They seem amazing physically, and just some of the things they do as well. But I don't team well at all. And so, like, I'm on team, like, I joke about it on Twitter all the time, but team undrafted free agent. But, like, if the best guy is a first-round pick, I want a first-round pick because I want to beat you in fantasy football. Not that player or that team or the NFL. Like, you, guy I'm playing this week or next week or in however many weeks it is till we get to do that again. So I don't care. Like, I don't not want to like a player. I don't understand bending logic or your mind to believe something you haven't even like gone and looked at to convince yourself that what you already think is true is true. I guess I just don't work that way. And that's fine. I'm not saying you should be more like me. It's just I don't know what to say to you. And I think, or them, not you. I love you. Watch my video. Appreciate it. Probably a Patreon. I love you. Seriously. But, yeah, I don't get that. So what's my point here? Like, if Terrace Marshall is a good player, for example, someone that I've come out very low on, I want to draft him. If he gets first-round draft capital, for example, I will draft him at a certain point. Have no fear. At some point, that draft capital becomes a better bet than metric Y or film grader review X. Like, I don't care. I just want to make less bad picks and more good picks. And to me, good picks are ones that either increase in value or score me more fantasy points than it cost on average to get that many fantasy points in like a trade or a startup pick. And bad's the other one. That's it. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't really care which player's name is attached to the statistical profile that gets me that. I root for players. Believe it or not, I love watching sports, and I'm rooting for the players. But like for me, when I'm doing fantasy football, I don't pretend to know them or have anything to like. I don't get teaming that way. So why am I talking about this? Because it seems to be a feature of the logic that says Chatarius Atwell, who's actually the subject of this video, by the way, I should say that, is bad because he's from Louisville. And it's not Chatarius Atwell. I haven't had specifically that conversation, but I get a lot of, yeah, but it's that team, that conference. I'm like, have you looked? Because I'm not telling you that maybe they're bad. Like, I want to know that. Again, not on team anyone, really. But what I'm saying when I say a player is very productive is that compared to the ways that I can compare him fairly and evenly to other players, this guy did something that's different. Very different. Different enough that it compares to the unicorns of the NFL, which are the fantasy relevant players. Well, there are many unicorns in the NFL, but the unicorns we're seeking are the ones that score a certain amount of points and therefore get top 24 seasons and top 12 seasons. And it's actually relatively rare any NFL prospect does that. Like, if it was Matt Kelly, actually. It's Matt Kelly Rotowall, player profiler. Who doesn't know? Who said something once, and occasionally Matt's got a way of saying and thinking that it'll just stick with me, and I remember that because it's a good way of thinking. It's a good lesson. If you want to get a better hit rate, like if you want to be an analyst, or you just want to, have good numbers in the prospecting game, or Bunny Rabbit it is again, just hate every player. Because the number of players that go into the NFL as prospects, and you always find someone to like him. In fact, the majority of prospects at some value. If you just say no, then you would have the best hit rate. Like, I can't say for sure because I haven't ran the numbers, but like just logic dictates. Like 50 players get drafted, 40 players get drafted, and we got an average 10. That get a fantasy relevant season or 2 fantasy relevant seasons. That means 30 players a draft class you are right on, and 10 you are wrong on. Like, that's the best hit rate ever, surely. So just hate them all. And I'd like to keep that in mind when thinking about prospecting. Like, it's easy to just write off a player and actually get the win, I guess. Bunny Rabbit is again. Because most players fail. Even if they have a good profile or a bad profile, they can fail. And so if you just want to take the best shot, just don't like them. Sometimes I lean on it, I'll be honest with you. There's a few players in this class I simply can't know enough about statistically. But it's still a good bet to say, no, I hate them. They're bad. They were bad in college. Look at this random stat that I don't actually use for anything because it doesn't matter. Because I'm just taking the bet that most players fail. And you got to you got to have an opinion on everything, apparently. So just take the best bet, which is that they're going to fail. For fantasy, not for professionally or for the NFL or anything else. Like, yeah. So it's all a crapshoot. And you're looking for the least likely thing ever. Really. Not ever, but you're looking for a really unlikely thing. Chatarius Atwell, however... I should probably talk about him a little bit. Like, I don't get... He's from Louisville. That's why it was in my mind. And I get it. Like, Louisville. That's not Alabama. And I'm aware. I honestly think some people who talk about team adjustments or team-centric analysis don't believe I'm on the intellectual level of understanding that Alabama and Louisville are different. Like, they think I might need help standing up sometimes, you know? Like, I know, I looked. But Chatarius Atwell, let's give it some context, okay? At age 19, he had a 41% share of the team's receiving yards. That's a percentage of the whole team's receiving yards, catching the ball and stuff, and gaining yards, for that entire year where he was 19 years old. And that's very good. But let's put it into some context, and for, you know, it's Louisville problemers, no one has ever done that at any age since 2000. That's the end of the statement. I don't have a but or an except. No player has ever had more than 38% of receiving yards for Louisville all the way back to 2000. And the closest is a guy who was 23 years old, I believe, and he got 38%. And Chatarius Atwell got 41% at 19. Like, even if you don't believe or haven't bothered to look or listen to anything I've ever, or anyone who's ever profiled data has said, to know that at least experience, but I think age, has a relative connection to how skilled you are to actually produce your... It's a good indicator that you have what it takes to convert your skill set into the NFL, whatever it happens to be, and be good. Then at least that statement, like, no one has literally had that larger, it at least tells you that it's not Louisville where players get that all the time. No one ever. Does that mean he's the best prospect in the NFL? And that's why my production model liked him second best overall? No, I mean, we haven't even put a price on that, you realize. I didn't say so. He's a first round pick. I'm just asking you to consider that he did something good. Very good. And it's very good across the things that compare well to players that are good in the NFL. Not just random things like age-adjusted production, specifically across a stat that most players, not just the average, but the vast majority of players who you've ever wanted on your fantasy team because they scored points, not because they were young and hip and sexy and cool, but because they scored points, have done well in that stat. And you can get even more accurate with it if you can you look at it in some way in context of the age that they produce that share of the receiving yards. And Chatarius Atwell wasn't just good at that stat. Even when looking at Louisville, it was exceptional. Like, there's no other word for it. I know we overuse words these days, so exceptional might not do it for you, but scrub out the fact that, you know, someone called a burrito exceptional once, or, you know, once you you got a good grade in your test and your dad was like, that's exceptional. Not those crappy versions of the word exceptional. Not to demean your test score, I'm sure it was great. But that's a genuinely exceptional thing to do. 40% of your team's total receiving yards at any age, at any level, is pretty exceptional. And this is college ball, and Louisville ain't peewee. It's not like 40% of your team's receiving yards in one game in that, you know, field game you played with your friends one day. Yeah, sure, that happens every day. In college, not at all. And not specifically in Louisville ever. For 22, 23-year-olds. And Harry Douglas, by the way, he got 33% of the team's receiving yards at age 21 once. And he wasn't the best wide receiver in the NFL or ever. And he wasn't playing on the exact same team, obviously, because turnover, coaching, whatever. Even conference, by the look of it. But, like, he was at least significant in fantasy and definitely a good NFL player. Chatarius Atwell had more than him. Does that mean he's better than Harry Douglas? Honestly, no. But he's done something to stand out really well. Remember the way I've been talking about it in other videos, but I don't think I've highlighted that I'm not just throwing out stats that, you know, everyone gets some version of this. No, that the punch through the ceiling, a signal on a profile that indicates that this person has something that might be a little unicorny about him. That's what that looks like. Well, this is what his looks like. It's this giant spike in his graph right there. Now, again, I like to see progression typically, but that high mark is really significant. Now, we're not hearing a lot of buzz about Atwell, and there's some other stuff that bugged me in his profile. An interesting trend, by the way, which I started the video out with and then forgot to finish. When you look at lower conference teams, that's where I started, remember. But I'm having a hard time tiering that because most of the time that devolves into really, that's a lower tier team is just, so it's kind of hard for a guy who doesn't know much about college to really figure out how to tier it. But I know like the SEC versus the ACC versus the MAC, right? That's at least some rough bucketing that I think most people would be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Less 5-star prospects or whatever. There's an indication, or I seem to find an indication that good players coming from lower tier conferences or lower tier teams tend to excel better in terms of the team average than the conference average. Like DeAndre Hopkins, for example, his yards per team pass attempts above average are higher when you compare him to the team average than when you compare him to the conference average. They get slightly average-ish, actually, and it's DeAndre Hopkins. And when you compare it to the conference, he still looked good in terms of percentage, and I had no problem prospecting him. He's just a good example of this trend. Because he played in, I think it was the ACC Coastal, which is, again, a step, I think, below the ACC, a step below the SEC. And that makes logical sense. I know everyone's talking about what's obvious, but it's not. You make what's the story that is obvious after the fact, because way too many things seem obvious and aren't borne out by the facts. For example, it seems obvious that the world's flat. Poking a big controversial bear there for some reason. But it's not, right? Right? It seems obvious that if you play with Justin Jefferson, slight hat tip to another video I've done, then you would have less of the team's receiving yards, right? But the other good players on that team had no problem getting a percentage of receiving yards. Now, let's use an example that actually played all the way out. Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry played in the same team in college. And they both crushed the average. Like, they had no problem. We're not actually expecting players to hit very overly significant thresholds. Not historic level thresholds like Atwell did at age 19. Just reasonable. Most players cross these thresholds on this graph at some point in their time in college. I would say most do. Most don't do it at these ages, and that's why, again, it seems to have good... it helps you out finding the unicorn profiles, right? A little bit better than if you just look at the percentages or just look at the receiving yards. What was I? Oh, yeah. So Hopkins was better against his team average than his conference average, and that seems to be a fact that's true when you look at lower conferences, and that makes sense to me because it's obvious now that I know that's an actual trend in the data. Not because it seems obvious just because I thought it up in my head. It seems to be true in the data. So the story that is obvious about that is if you're on a bad team, for example, the Jets, or wherever Atwell's playing, Louisville, then the team is going to produce less yards, less opportunities, less passing attempts, less opportunities in the red zone, yada, yada, yada. But you're going to stand out if you're an exceptional player further above your teammates. Now, you can't apply that to everyone, and that's where adjustments gets tricky, and everyone wants to bump Alabama players for team adjustments and not Louisville players. It would actually, if you were doing it and actually did a process and went and looked, you would bump Louisville players based on their team adjustments because they're playing in lower conference, and you would ding players playing at a higher conference that didn't meet thresholds. Like, that's worse than players in Louisville not hitting thresholds. They actually get an extra bump because they're playing in worse situations if it's a bad team. Now, I'm not saying Louisville's a bad team. Again, I'm having a hard time identifying who is and isn't bad. But just an example of what seems to be obvious, actually, if you want to implement it, would be implemented in reverse. It's not necessarily intuitive, but it is then obvious and makes sense once I explain the way the data is working, so you know what is true, and then you're like, oh, so what must be happening is you're on the Jets, you're Robbie Anderson, you're much better than the other players on your team, but because you're playing for the Jets, you're not going to look better than Julio. Of course you're not, because you're playing for the Jets, man. That's a hard get to be as productive or as good on a per attempt basis as someone playing with Dak Prescott, or someone playing with Deshaun Watson, or someone playing with Aaron Rodgers, while you've got Adam Gase calling plays for Sam Darnold. Like, that would be a rough get, but you are going to show up better against your team average. On the other hand, you could be a good team in a bad conference, and that will require a different adjustment. So again, it's not quite even just a seesaw of conference to team, but that trend in the data kind of highlights how what seems obvious should really come from what's true, instead of what's seeming obvious being applied to what you think numbers should tell you. Now, often when a player comes from a lower place like Atwell, I find the opposite going on in a lot of narratives. Having said that, there are some problems here. I had some problems with some of the numbers coming up, and I really like to dig into that kind of conversation further, but we are still stuck as a group in trying to accept that one number is higher than another means that one number is higher than another. We can't even get past that because people want to team so hard that they want to prove that a lower number is higher than a higher number. And literally that's the level of discourse we've got going at this point. Like, I'm going to per game it. Why? Randomly. Prove it. Prove that's... Anyway. We can't get to most of that stuff because we're still stuck in that stuff. We're still stuck in accepting basic things. Like, Chatarius Atwell was really productive in this situation, and that's positive. And another player in a better team was less productive, and that's a negative. That doesn't necessarily mean you rank Atwell higher than him. It just means he excelled in his situation and he struggled in his situation in that better team. So how do we value with that? And that's the conversation we can't get to because no one will accept that one is negative and one is positive, which you would have to do to get to the next stage of conversation. So let me try to sum it up. Let me try to get to some of it. Atwell has some problems on his profile. There was some hinkiness to some of his per-game pass attempts. That 40% number, despite being significant, and so is that 23% being slightly below average here. What's going on there? Dominator's actually above the line, but his market share receiving yards dropped below the line. He does have a good balance between touchdowns and yards as well, just in case you're interested in some of those other threads I was weaving for other prospects. But yeah, there was some stuff I didn't quite understand, so I actually clicked on some highlight reels. I do that from time to time, flexing my tape. Not really. Highlight reels don't tell you nothing, and I know that. But I just wanted to get some sort of visual sense of what's his playing doing. And by the way, if you're a video editor out there, you're probably not watching this, but if you think you are helping a player by showing behind the lines of scrimmage, plays that start behind the lines of scrimmage for a wide receiver, stop. No one wants to come out of a highlight reel, like the best plays a player ever did, thinking, oh, so he could be Tavon Austin, but good. That's not the feels we want, right? Like, just, no. Because most of Chatarius Atwell's highlight reels were just jet sweeps and behind the line of scrimmage movements and a few bobble-handed catches, frankly. I was like, that's probably just a bad reel, right? So I hit up Zach Reed. I actually want to talk to a lot of film grinders about him, but Zach Reed's kind of on speed dial in my DMs. I was like, what's going on? And he basically confirmed, yeah, it's mostly gadget plays and a simpler I would describe it as a simple wide receiver role. So what that means is Atwell probably has a lot of development to go. And if he's going to be good in the NFL, like he hasn't practiced a lot of stuff he would need to do in the NFL for us to benefit from it in terms of fantasy. And it is worth noting that the only first-round pick from this team is Devontae Parker. He took 4 years to break out for a fantasy-relevant ceiling, or floor for that matter. And in fact, he's the only one who took 4 years, so it kind of feeds into that narrative that it's reasonable to assume he would take longer to develop. Now, to my friend, I don't know actually, I would call Nick Whalen a friend of mine. I don't know what word he would use for me, maybe who? Or some kind of insult. Probably somewhere in between there, but I think of him as a friend. He was talking on Twitter the other day about all the things we don't know that go into the end result, and that's a really interesting conversation too, but he was specifically talking about personality. Like, I don't know these people, or their work ethic. I don't know these people, or if a person can psychologically take a job that is so much in the public eye, which is not necessarily what you think you're signing up for when you do sports, right? Maybe a politician knows that going in, but when you're an athlete, maybe that doesn't cross your mind and you're not prepared, or you don't know how to prepare, or it turns out you're not good at it. All this stuff, which we will never know about and never be able to calculate in or factor in, that goes into whether a player is going to succeed or not. Or if they're likable, if their coaches like them, if their teammates like them. And Nick mentioned all of that and more, and it was a really interesting tweet of his. I recommend checking him out if you haven't already. Nick Whalen on Twitter, at Nick Whalen, I believe it is. Really good tape watcher, actually. An interesting guy to follow when you're interested in prospecting or evaluating prospects going to the NFL. And that's true, too. I don't know any of that about Atwell. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I don't know what even I would think to look at to know how quickly or slowly a player can develop a wide receiver. Are they things they can learn? I definitely don't think they're things that you already come with preset. You go to college and you're either good or a bad wide receiver and now you have to prove it. I think they're things you learn. But, like, can you learn them quickly? Can NFL teams teach them more quickly? Or actually, since it's the NFL, it's probably going to be much more on you to just pick it up as quick as possible and show that you're good at it, because the NFL really isn't a developmental league, as we know from other trends that we've seen, specifically at the running back position, that me and Zach have talked about before. So all that soup that goes into Atwell didn't play like Parker did at Louisville. That's all a concern. There's some that 40% number is probably a lot to do with the fact that he was playing jet sweeps and was very fast and good in traffic, I guess is something a tape grinder would say. Whatever it takes to win on the types of plays that he was winning on, he excelled at it. So it's pretty unfair to compare that 40% number to Harry Douglas or Devontae Parker or Alabama wide receiver X. But it is still a positive thing that the team pretty much converted their offense to whatever it was Atwell did, because he's co-opting 40% of the yards from the receiving game. So he definitely has a dynamic skill set that he is very good at, the NFL could get use out of, and we don't know if he can develop what he had, and we also don't know what he hasn't developed yet, because I'm just a numbers grinder. So we don't know that secret sauce, and we don't know if he's got that secret sauce, and we don't even know what he's trying to eat with that secret sauce, or garnish with that secret sauce. But what I can say is most players are not as productive as Chatarius Atwell was. And that's a positive thing, and we should know that. And whatever skills he does have, he's very dynamic, and he's very good at them. And there is significant reason to suspect that he could become fantasy relevant in the NFL if he gets opportunity, and if he can make whatever source that was I was just talking about to do something in the NFL. I think he's really interesting profile. I recommend checking it out, either from if you prefer to watch film or you prefer to watch or grind through numbers, or both. It's a really interesting profile to try and get your head around. I can't say, like, this is not a typical evaluation for me. I felt very, this is new. This is a new territory for me. Because normally I'm all about smaller school players who are epically productive, but there's some difference here. And yet his production is kind of historical level, and I don't use that word very often. I know everyone wants to throw, again, the extraordinary and historical terms, and I really try not to. But, like, in terms of Louisville, no one's been this big a part of the passing offense, and he wasn't, apparently, a traditional passing offensive weapon, which is just kind of remarkable. Whatever word you want to use for it. It's interesting. I highly recommend looking it out, because if he gets opportunity in the NFL and develops into a role, even if it's not fantasy relevant, like, he's something we can use and have a reference point for that type of player on, no matter what he does. And so it could be useful. So I definitely recommend checking him out, even if you're not overly interested in, just to get familiarity with him, because it could be a useful reference point for other prospects, frankly. I find him very interesting. I really do. So yeah, that's where I am at. We'll have to see what the NFL thinks, where his draft capital comes from. And let me know what you think. This video is way too long. I've got a headache. That's how long it's been. I've been here for 30 minutes. So I better go. But yeah, check him out, definitely. And if you think a thing, and that, yeah, I know. My thumbnails suck. Occasionally I post a video with my microphone muted, and I am what I am. But what I'm not is someone just trying to sell you a line. I'm honestly just trying to get, more of the good draft picks and less of the bad draft picks, and I enjoy the conversation with other people while trying to do that. So, and then that video that had mute, that's essentially partly the same conversation. I was like, if you think a thing, you can just go check. Or you can go check the data, as I prefer to do, to try to develop ideas on how it works and then come up with stories to try and profile other prospects. But like, if you think, well, maybe players excel better at team stats and conference stats, you can literally filter and look and base your ideas on what actually happens. And you don't just have to pontificate on what is obviously true and then try and apply it as when, because I think more often you're just going to I would be trying to validate what I already think based on, whatever thoughts have filtered into my bubble. Like, this guy's great. Okay, I got to prove that guy's great. So I definitely recommend actually going and looking. That's all that video was, to show you, like, on the graphs, this graph that I make, who was it? I think it was Ryan Frilly. Hey, bud. He was asking me who these top dots are, and I wanted to make real clear, I'm happy to answer those questions. Like, I love doing this, guys. I don't know why, but I love it. And I'm happy to go answer it for you, but I wanted to take that opportunity to point out to Ryan, like, data. Yeah, I mean, you can always ask me. I love answering that kind of question, but if you have other questions that I haven't answered, or you want to find out for yourself, suppositions, ideas, just hypotheses, I guess scientists would call them, you can just go filter by team or by conference or by year range and go look at the numbers. See literally just a visual check. And in this case, for that simple answer, you can literally filter by, because the graph says at the top, players between 2008 and 2019 with top 24 seasons. That's all those blue dots are. Every player with at least one top 24 season, their market share of receiving yards at every age. And if you go look, I think one of those dots is DJ Moore at age 20, and one of them is Demaryius Thomas at age 22. I think those are the two you were talking about, Ryan. And again, I don't mind, I'm happy to answer. Pick another dot, I'll tell you. It's fine. But I thought it would be a good in to say, hey, look, you can literally find the answers to questions you have, which is literally how I started this, guys. I was like, I wonder if, but there was nowhere to go search. There was nowhere to go filter or look for specifically the group I was thinking of. And like, I got to a place where I can actually do that. And the whole reason I give you everything is so maybe that you can. I mean, you don't have to. Again, this isn't me saying do your own work. I love doing your work. Ask away. I really do. But sometimes I don't think I make it clear. And so I try to do a better job of, like, do you have a question? You have a thought? You think team matters? You can just go filter and see. Like, do players get 20% all the time? Yeah. So is it weird, therefore, that a player doesn't get? Yeah, actually, it's a below average mark. If you don't hit 20% by the end of their college career, that's rare. Is it rare for Ohio? There's a good question. You could go look. The answer is yes. Essentially, back to why we don't have really an explanation for Michael Thomas. Sometimes players are just don't dominate in college, but do dominate in the NFL. Very rarely, but it does happen. I mean, I'm okay with that explanation, but if you're not, you could go and look at a history of Ohio. You don't have to trust me, and you can see, well, who did dominate, and when did they dominate, or whatever thought you have. And that's all that video was. It was a 20-minute version of that. So yeah, I best get out of here. I apologize for that video. I apologize that my production quality is always going to suck. I don't have an accent light, but I know. All I can promise you is I'm not trying to sell you online. I'm not trying to sell you anything. Like, don't get me wrong, I really appreciate the Patreon support. You've got no idea. I like food, and that helps. And the dream is, I'm not hiding behind, I'm not trying to make money. The dream is, if I could do this for a living, like, wow. Yes, I want that. But I'm under no illusions about how mystically impossible that is. So I'm just appreciating the ride, and ultimately I'm trying to get more good picks and less bad picks. And if your favorite player is one of those good picks and I haven't realized it yet because he's on a bad team or on a good team or he played with Justin Jefferson, like, I don't actually care. I would like you to let me know, but you should know I'm going to go look and see if that's true. And then if it's not true, I'm going to go, well, he still likes him, and I value that opinion, but the logic behind that he's using to express. So the best thing I've found is just to be honest. And that's why I posted on Twitter the other day. It's probably the most interacted with tweets ever. It's okay to like a player just because you like the way he looks on tape. If that's the honest truth, he just looks good to me, man. That's the best information. It's not, I have to justify that and therefore team and therefore Justin Jefferson. Like, that's not true. I think that's not true about those particular prospects. I think they just like the way he looks. Because then you could just explain why he looks a certain way and why you like that. And then we're starting to build. Okay, well, how many other players have done that? Because then we're starting off in the right direction. If we start to look for things that justify whatever it is that makes us feel or think a certain way, then we're going back asswards, man. Whether it's data or film or anything else, you start off with the honest, why do I like this player? And that's, like, I guess why I don't understand. Like, some of those arguments just zone me out. I'm like, what's going on? I don't understand it. It's because I have no, like, I like people. I like these players. I think they're phenomenal, but I'm not on a team. I don't support a team. And because I'm not watching, I don't develop that kind of, oh, I want that guy. I hope that guy. And then I seek reasons to justify it. I don't have anything to justify because I don't watch college. I do in the NFL. I will constantly find reasons that undrafted free agents are good, which is why I make more of a joke about it. Like, undrafted free agents matter. Ooh, you hater. Because I know I'm working from something that could be a bias of mine to prefer Zach Pascal, and I try to be very strict with myself when I'm doing rankings about undrafted free agents because I know it's a thing I have, or fourth round pick or beyond, actually. But anyway, I've gone on too much about it because you don't need me to tell you this shit. You just want to know what I think of Chatarius Atwell's profile. So hopefully I did that, but I did, that muted video kind of triggered me when I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to do more videos. Trying to do better at them, despite the fact I don't think I'm ever going to be good. It's never going to be production quality synonymous with PA. It's not going to happen. But I'm trying to do better, so I apologize for that. Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. Hope you're happy, healthy, safe, and keep grinding. Guys, girls, and football fans alike. Appreciate you a lot. Really do. Thank you. Bye. I'm going now. Bye.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind? Take